All right, everybody, I want to welcome you today to Pastor's Point of View. I believe this is number 164. My name is Dr. Andy Woods, and I'm the pastor teacher here at Sugarland Bible Church. Today, we're going to be dealing with the subject of border enforcement and national security. In other words, is it really true that people of Middle Eastern descent from jihadist countries are making their way through South America, Central America, and across our southern border here in the United States? You might be asking, why in the world would a pastor on Pastor's Point of View deal with this kind of subject? The book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 26 says this, "And he," that's God, "made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined their appointed times and boundaries of their habitation." What this says is God is the God of nations. And from one man, Adam, he created nations, he created boundaries, he created borders. And if a country can't enforce their own borders, then they're really not a sovereign country. So we here look at the issue of border enforcement as actually a biblical, spiritual issue. And if you're interested, one of our early pastors' points of views dealt with this subject. We dealt with the biblical morality of border enforcement, parts 1 and 2, and those were Pastor's Points of Views, number 8 and number 9. But before we bring on today's special guest, let me sort of explain why this is an issue that most Americans are very, very interested in. I'm reading here from a WorldNet Daily article, March 24th, 2021. The title of it is, "Did Muslim Suspect Pick Boulder Store Because It Was Kosher?" The subtitle is, "Syrian Immigrant Held in Murder of 10 Displayed Devotion to Sharia on Social Media." And this really deals with a tragic shooting that happened not long ago. At the end of the month of March 2021 at a particular supermarket. And as you start to read articles on this and do research on this, where tragically 10 people were killed, what you start to learn is the shooter was a Syrian immigrant. The individual who was the shooter had posted all kinds of pro-Islamic, pro-jihadist paraphernalia on his social media page. And what you learn is that this particular supermarket that was targeted advertised kosher offerings for its significant Jewish clientele. And this also happened around or just before Passover weekend. And so your average American reads a headline like this and they just sort of scratch their head saying, what in the world's going on? How did such a person get into the country to begin with? And that's why this issue of border enforcement is something that's paramount on our thinking, and that's why we're dealing with it. So to help us handle responsibly this very important issue, we're bringing on today a very special guest. He is actually an incredibly special guest. His name is Todd Bensman. He is a border security specialist. He is also a seasoned investigative reporter and scholar. And if I could, let me give you some of his accomplishments. He is the author of a brand new book, 2021. You can get that book wherever books are sold. The title of it is America's Covert War. The full title of the book, America's Covert War is the untold story of the nation's battle to prevent jihadist infiltration. Bombardier Press, 2021, hot off the press, in other words. He is particularly qualified to write this book because he is a senior national security fellow with the Center for Immigration Studies. He has authored articles for Homeland Security Today magazine, and he is a contributor to Middle East Forum. He's a writing fellow, and he's an author at The Federalist. At townhall.com, he is a political columnist and commentator. Now, let me give you his full bio if I could. Todd Bensman is the Center's Texas-based Senior National Security Fellow. He is the author of America's Covert War, the untold story of the nation's battle to prevent jihadist infiltration, the untold story of a secret American border program created to prevent terrorist infiltration over the United States southwest border. Prior to joining CIS, in August 2018, Bensman led Homeland Security intelligence efforts for 9 years in the public sector. Bensman's body of work with the policy and intelligence operations is founded on more than 20 years of experience as an award-winning journalist covering national security topics with a particular focus on the Texas border. In 2009, Bensman transitioned from journalism to join the Texas Department of Public Safety's Intelligence and Counterterrorism Division, which he managed teams of intelligence analysts that worked in concert with federal Homeland Security and U.S. intelligence community agencies to identify and mitigate terrorism threats. From the state of Texas Fusion Center for 9 years, he designed and directed collection operations that fed into the intelligence community and prompted or advanced federal counterterrorism investigations. Among his original programs was a specialized effort to help federal partners disrupt human smuggling networks, transporting migrants to the U.S. land border from countries where Islamist terrorist organizations are active. Prior to his government experience, Bensman worked on staff for the Dallas Morning News, CBS, Hearst newspapers, covering the FBI, federal law enforcement, and serving on investigative teams. He reported extensively on national security issues after 9/11 and worked for more than 25 countries in Latin America, the Middle East, and Africa. In Texas, he authored a long-form investigation stories with an emphasis on border security related to illegal immigration and Mexico's drug war. His reporting on humans struggling from Muslim authority or Muslim majority countries, Mexico's drug war, and cross-border gun smuggling to cartels earned him 2 National Press Club awards and an Inter-American Press Association award, among others. The Texas Institute of Letters twice recognized Bensman's border coverage for high excellence in newspaper reporting. During the early 1990s, he reported on the Gulf War, to include Scud missile attacks and refugee issues from Israel, Egypt, and Jordan. He went on to cover Eastern Europe, to include armed conflict in Moldova, and a year covering warfare in Bosnia, where he provided frequent dispatches from the siege in Sarajevo. Bensman holds 2 master's degrees from the Naval Postgraduate School, the Center for Homeland Defense and Security, and his thesis was entitled "The Ultra Marathoners of Human Smuggling Defending Forward Against the Dark Network That Can Transport Terrorists Across the American Land Borders." He holds a master's degree from the University of Missouri School of Journalism, and an undergraduate degree in journalism from North Arizona University. And once again, the title of his book, which is available wherever books are sold and on Amazon, is by Todd Bensman, America's Covert Border War, The Untold Story of the Nation's Battle to Prevent Jihadist Infiltration. So as you can see from this biography, he's certainly a world expert on this subject, and that's why we have designed some questions that we're going to do with him today during an interview sort of style or format, just to give people an accurate picture of what's on everybody's mind, this issue of porous borders, and also the issue of the potential threat of terrorists coming across the border into the United States. So let's bring Todd on. And Todd, let me start with this. Todd, it's my understanding that the need for your book arose out of you having to collect information, starting with the FBI investigation in Dallas, Texas, following or immediately after the events of 9/11. Those events thrust you into the world of investigating terrorists, and specifically the immigration of 9/11 terrorists into the United States and how they slipped through the cracks of immigration. You needed to ascertain whether there might be any other threats that we should be worried about. And so at this point, Todd, we'll let you take it from here. Thank you for joining us.
Because those airliners were all American airline jets. And so the Dallas FBI and American Airlines, in the immediate, while the smoke was still rising and the flames and all the rest, went into action here in Texas to try to figure out the manifests, the pilots, the crew, the people who are on board, the video, and all of that stuff that went into trying to identify the hijackers. All happened in Dallas. So I was sort of thrust into the vortex of terrorism coverage, and I never left it after that. From that point on, and I started to hear rumors after a time while I was still in Dallas that Arabs were crossing the border, that Muslims were crossing the southern border, and I never was able to validate that while I was still in Dallas. But then I took this job in San Antonio on the investigative projects team. And the very first thing I wanted to test out was whether that was true. And everybody told me, don't do that story. That's a Republican, lie. That's all sort of made up stuff by the hard right wing, whatever. But to make a long story short, I just started calling immigration lawyers cold out of the phone book all along the border. And every single immigration lawyer that I got on the phone, probably 6 or 7, I'd ask them, "Hey, do you have any clients that came over the border from the Middle East?" And every single one of them had 5, 6, 7, 8, 10. They all had clients that they were representing who had crossed the border. And eventually I was able to convince one of them to introduce me to an Iraqi who had come over. And I went down to Brownsville and I met that Iraqi. I must be the first journalist who has ever met a Middle Eastern Arab who'd come over the border, even though they had been doing it for years. It had just never been reported. Nobody wanted to report that. I spent probably 7 or 8 hours over 2 days with that poor Iraqi in Brownsville, Texas. and then put him on a bus to go with his uncle up in Detroit. But the story that I got from him about how he smuggled all
Mm-hmm.
the way, he had been a refugee, a war refugee. In actually, he was a Chaldean Christian.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, the Muslim extremists were uh, very bloodily persecuting Syrian Christians and Chaldean Christians in Iraq, who are like the oldest community of Christians. They still speak the original language, Aramaic,
Mm-hmm.
and they had all been driven into the survivors have been driven into neighboring Syria and Jordan, and there they were stuck, and a smuggling black market arose out of that, and you could then find your way to the southern border. Well, obviously, if a Chaldean Christian victim of Islamic terrorism could make that journey and cross, then so could the Islamic terrorist who
Right.
was persecuting. That was sort of my angle about it. So I wrote a 5-part series, the first, any kind of serious journalism about that issue, crossing the border, and raised the issue and framed it as a national security border issue. It was fairly well received. Won a National Press Club award for foreign correspondence. The newspaper sent me to Syria and Jordan to do primary reporting and collection for that piece. And then I also was able to go to Guatemala, which is on the route. I followed his route all the way. I backtracked his route from the beginning all the way through to the Texas border where he crossed. That took me through Guatemala and southern Mexico, where I met lots of others just like him
Mm-hmm.
on the way in. And after that, I went to work in intelligence at DPS and did this same work. But after discovering that there was this whole world of people that were working on the same thing, and they'd all read my stuff, they were all very excited to have seen a reporter writing about this
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so we were all instant buddies, across the country from DC to San Diego. We all kind of connected. And for 9 years, I worked with them on these same issues and interviewed a great many of these, we call them special interest aliens in government parlance. I know that was one of your questions.
Yeah.
That's how they are tagged. And I learned from the inside what was going on to counter this potential threat. So then, when I was in intelligence, working those, a lot of that I couldn't put in the book because it is covert, it is at the classified realm, but I knew that there were ways into it that you could see it publicly, that maybe you wouldn't be able to see it publicly if you didn't know the unpublic part.
Mm-hmm.
So, so I was able to gather some of that. And then in 2014, just quickly, I'll try to wrap that up. Um, I was, the Department of Homeland Security awarded me the opportunity to get another master's degree in Homeland Security at the Naval Postgraduate School. And what I decided to work on there was my thesis about this kind of long distance smuggling. And the thesis was based entirely on court records of cases that were brought in the United States against these smugglers of special interest aliens. And that opened up I mean, really it was pretty much made public. If you put all those pieces together, you could see the whole portrait of what we had been doing in the court records. The thesis was designated the best thesis for the university. It got honors and all the rest of that, and I was very proud of that work. And so that was another major piece of research.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that would be primary research. The other thing that happened was that when I went to the Center for Immigration Studies, I wanted to continue on with my work in this, and the center sent me to Panama and Costa Rica, where I knew there was a bottleneck for these kind of migrants coming through. From my intelligence work, I knew
Hmm.
where they were coming and how they were coming in, and so I was able to go down there and meet them and talk to them and interview them, Iraqis and Iranians and Pakistanis and uh, Somalis and Bangladeshis and all of the people that the mainstream media said didn't exist.
Hmm.
But I got them on videotape, and I made sure that you know there were
Hmm.
some pictures of me with them here and there.
Yeah, you have some of them in your book.
Yes, yeah, there's a reason why I did that, because
Yeah,
I anticipated that there might be some blowback, but those are kind of the elements of the
yeah,
book. It was a 13-year process. The journalism on this end and the Center for Immigration Studies on this end are public, you know, primary research in the field. And then the rest of it is whatever I could get safely out of the intelligence world and my thesis.
yeah. So this is a 13-year project. And I want people to understand this. He did not get into this trying to prove something. There's so much dishonesty in academia where researchers are going the wrong way. They're trying to make the data fit their thesis. And you did not do that. Yours is, it seems to me, is the opposite. You completely built your conclusion based on your actually interviewing people, building your, data from the ground up. And so I want people to understand that. Did I represent that right?
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
I would definitely put it that way. I mean, look, when I was with DPS, one of my jobs, so I led the counterterrorism unit, actually created it and built it and grew it. And what would happen is when a jihadist, when a report, public report, which happened fairly often,
Mm-hmm.
was published about, ISIS terrorists are crossing the border and they're going to attack Fort Huachuca in the next week.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the governor, Perry, at the time, would immediately be swamped with phone calls from constituents saying, "What the heck is going on? Is that true?" And the first thing that they would do is go to me and my
Mm-hmm.
unit to determine whether it's true. That's all they wanted to know. Is this true, these reports? And many times those reports were coming from, conservative Republican quarters, and I was, had to find that they were untrue. Most
Mm-hmm.
of those were untrue, and I would have to write reports that, they got it wrong. This isn't true. Don't worry about it. And so, I mean, doesn't really matter to me which side is making a claim. If it's untrue, it's just untrue.
Mm-hmm.
And I point out in the book that this happened many times, and I describe some of these occasions when I had to find that the claims were untrue.
Mm-hmm.
But also that for every untrue one, there were like a dozen true ones that nobody ever heard about.
Mm.
So that was sort of what we're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's a very nice segue into this question. The on one end of the stick, you got people that are hyperbolic, and they talk about prayer rugs, Middle Eastern prayer rugs on the border, and I believe that because I watched somebody's I watched somebody's show and they told me it was true. So I thought I could just go to the border and find Middle Eastern prayer rugs everywhere. So that's hyperbolic. But then on the other end of the stick, you've got people saying there are no Middle Eastern people crossing the southern border. So where is the truth? It's somewhere in the middle, right?
Well, yeah. Look, I remember those prayer rug claims when I was a reporter first coming out, was looking for an Iraqi. I never found any prayer rugs. They do find items, Qurans. I know for a fact they found those things, but I think that people get bogged down unnecessarily in whether there are prayer rugs or Qurans being found down there.
Mm-hmm.
because it just doesn't matter, since we have actual real human beings that you can
Right.
find an interview there who use those things. They use
Yes.
prayer rugs, and like, so who cares if a prayer rug got found
Mhm.
down there or not, or to argue over whether prayer rugs, when you can find the actual Iraqi and
Yeah.
the actual Somali and the actual Yemeni down there. So that's my position on
Mhm.
prayer rugs. Like, why bother wasting time with about prayer
Mhm.
rugs? Just go find the actual migrants that use them.
Mhm. Yeah. So then these people, going to the next question, these are what you call SIAs, and I think that stands for special interest aliens. And I was watching one of your interviews, and you said even that vernacular, has changed a little bit here and there.
Yeah.
But my understanding is an SIA is basically somebody who is posing as a migrant from Central America who really comes from the Middle East or comes from a part of the world that's an Islamic country. Do I have that right, or do I
Well,
need that?
a special interest alien is the official government vernacular, the label that's put on any immigrant who crosses the border or even comes into an airport, who's from one of usually about 35 countries in the Middle East, North Africa, or South Asia. Doesn't matter whether they were posing as this or that. If they are from one of those countries and they arrive at the border, they get stamped special interest alien in the files. And the reason for that is because then that allows the Homeland Security apparatus to do additional security vetting on those people. So anybody who's got SIA stamped in their file is going to, theoretically anyway, is supposed to be, um, interviewed and their phones dumped, and uh, you know, national security databases checked, and foreign intelligence services called, and all sorts of things happen with an SIA, special interest alien, that would never happen with a Mexican or a
Mhm.
Central American. And that's the reason why they stamped special interest aliens. Now, you're right. They have the new current term is special interest undocumented person,
Yeah.
something like that, because they don't like the word alien right now.
Right. Right. Right.
So they've gotten rid of special interest alien, and now it's this other thing, but it all means the same thing.
Okay. Well, let's get just to the heart of this, as I understand it, is as follows. Is there really a nexus between border enforcement and national security? Can you cite specific examples and you've already cited some, of Middle Easterners mixing in with the migrant flow from Southern and Central America? And now's your chance to nail it and give it to us clean.
So the answer is, of course, thousands each year. I wouldn't say that they are great numbers, but in the last 5 or 8 years, it's been probably about 3,000 to 4,000 a year who are actually caught crossing the border from those 35 countries. Uh, from all of the countries that we mentioned, uh, they they are not automatically terrorists. You
Right.
can't. Nobody should say that there are 3,000 or 4,000 terrorists that cross. That the Trump administration made that mistake, and
Mm-hmm.
just a needless error. And people were
Mm-hmm.
like, "There's not 3,000 terrorists a year." What they meant to say is that there were 3,000 SIAs who cross
Right.
annually. And of those, every year there will be a certain percentage, a small percentage, the needle in the haystack,
Yeah.
who have ties to terrorism, who have histories with jihadist organizations, have ideologies, current ideologies that are violent, and and who are on the FBI's terrorist watch lists
Mhm.
already.
Okay, so that's what you mean by needle in a haystack.
Yes,
Um,
the entire
and
apparatus is built around trying to sift from the SIA traffic who is dangerous. What can we
ne-
and to just make sure that the other 3,000 are not dangerous.
Mhm.
It's a tough thing to do.
Well, here's your detractors. You know, I could hear them saying, you know, you're just dealing with, quote, a statistically insignificant group. I think I saw in your book, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that from the year 2012 to the year 2017, there was about 20 such people that we're talking about that represented that needle in the haystack. Do I have that right?
Yeah, well, per year, about 20 a year.
Per year. And, you know, people can look at that and say 20 people, whoop-de-doo. You know, does
Yeah,
that make that's insignificant? Who cares? So how would you respond to that?
and they do say whoop-de-doo about that. I get that, but here's the issue with and I point out in my book at great length that small numbers equal huge outsized consequences when we're talking about terrorist attack. We let me by way of contextualizing this, that we only had 19 hijackers for 9/11, and we went to war in Afghanistan for 20 years. Okay, and that's just one part of what happened as a result of those 19 hijackers. It doesn't take very many at all, a handful,
Right.
to change the course of American history and policy and expenditure and fear and politics, electoral outcomes, national priorities, and national rejiggering of interests. It just takes a few. And I would argue that the the apparatus that we have deployed at the border is there to
Mm-hmm.
prevent that from happening,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just about bodies and the number of attacks. It's about the reaction and response to the bodies and attacks, which can be very, very expensive and very costly in lives and treasure. So by way of a, a more recent example to show what I mean by that is Europe. Europe in 2015, I dedicate my entire first chapter to what
Mm-hmm.
happened to Europe, because it's so important as a laboratory experiment
Mm-hmm.
to see what this actually looks like and what the consequences were for Europe. 2015, everybody knows there was a mass migration crisis over the borders from Muslim majority countries primarily. Angela Merkel opened the gates. They're talking multiculturalism. A lot of what they're talking about in 2015, the European leaders, sounds exactly the same as what we're hearing out of the Biden administration
Mm-hmm.
and their supporters. It's the same terminologies, the same ideologies about immigration and borders. But in Europe's case, they said, "Yeah, we're letting everybody in. We're tolerant here. We're all about, multiculturalism." And within a very short period of time, ISIS in Syria deployed operatives into that migration flow, posing as refugees from the war. They crossed in and conducted the Paris attacks, coordinated, multi site suicide bombings with the suicide belts and machine guns and the whole bit. Killed 130 in that one attack and wounded, I want to say, close to 800. And then a few months later, the same the survivors went on and conducted the Brussels attacks.
Did the Charlie Hebdo thing come out of this as well in
That happened
2015?
That happened earlier and
Okay.
those ones did not come over the border.
Okay.
These ones did come over the border in a mass migration. And it has to be distinguished. But there are different ways. Terrorist travel is a major tactic that intelligence communities take great pains to study, because if you can't get to your target's safe. Terrorist travel is the one of the main prongs of counterterrorism in the world. So if suddenly there's this new thing happening of crossing the borders, pretending to be migrants, pretending to be persecuted asylum seekers, and then they turn around and blow things up and kill people, that is something that is very brand new on the world stage. And it happened in like in an industrial way in Europe. They did Paris, Brussels. I did a study for Center for Immigration Studies, and that was really intended for the book. Uh, but it turned out that from just open source materials, it took several months to do this study. I was able to determine that there were about 104 jihadists who were infiltrated over the external land borders into Europe and committed all of that mayhem between 2015 and 2018. And since 2018, 2019, 2020, those attacks have continued. We
Mm-hmm.
are still having border crossing immigrants in Europe killing people in France and in Germany and in England and across the European Union nations. So 104 by my count. There was somebody else, Sam Mullins did a book. He beat me to the punch on the same. We both had the same idea. And we discovered each other after his book published. And I was like, oh, I'm almost about to publish my study.
Mm.
Sam's study had 140.
Wow.
His time was the point is that somebody might very well say, wow, only 140 out of millions. But those 140 caused unbelievably extensive societal permanent damage and consequences to all of those countries. Brexit was the
Mm-hmm.
result, the direct result of the Paris and Brussels attacks. That's what kicked it over the edge, the Brexit. There was a US military campaign, NATO campaign in Syria that was solely devoted to shutting down the border exits from Syria so that more couldn't get through and
Mm-hmm.
conduct attacks. The European countries were forced to spend just untold hundreds of billions of dollars on brand new security, counter terrorism security. They had to stop the immigration. It was clear, and so I mean, the book just goes on and on about the consequences of 100 guys.
Yeah. Well, that refutes the statistically insignificant argument and also answers the question, what can we learn from the failure of other countries? But let's get to something that you alluded to. It's been called the Biden effect. You brought up the Biden administration. So here we are in the middle of a brand new presidential administration, moving away from Donald Trump to Joseph Biden. And my question is, has the change of leadership from the Trump administration to the Biden administration introduced specific policy changes that increase this needle in the haystack phenomenon? And can you be specific as possible and identify those policy changes?
Yeah. All right. So the Biden effect is, I wrote that column in last November before the election, calling it the Biden effect because they used to have something called the Trump effect, which was during the campaign, the Trump campaign, when he was saying, I'm closing the border, we're building a wall, we're doing all these things, we're going to clamp down on this illegal immigration. That had just the words had the effect in the homes of
Mm-hmm.
Central Americans of, I'm not going to try it. this new guy's going to get in, and I'm going to spend all this money on smuggling fees and everything else, and I'm not going to get in, so I'm not going. And the result was the Trump effect, which was that the ICE detention facilities across the country suddenly were empty for the first time in history. They stopped coming. They stopped coming. And then after a while, when it became clear that it was going to take a while for him to enact the policies that he did enact, they did start coming again. But nevertheless, it was called the Trump effect. The Biden effect is the equal opposite of the Trump effect. So during the campaign, the Biden campaign, actually even before he was the nominee, when all the Democrats were campaigning, there were 8 or 9 of them, or 12 or 15 of them, I forget. At one point, there were so many they couldn't fit them all on the stage, and they were every single one of them were trying to outdo each other in how welcoming they were going to be, how many they were going to let in, how much they were going to give to those who crossed, how they were going to be the opposite of Donald Trump, and that is called the Biden effect. I saw the Biden effect in action in southern Mexico and on a reporting trip in Chiapas, and I'm down there in Tapachula interviewing immigrants who I'm asking them, why are you there? There was a National Guard roadblock put in place, Mexican roadblocks that were put in place, and they were all being trapped in the southern part. They weren't allowed to proceed because Trump had made the Mexicans put that National Guard military down there, and it was very difficult then to go forward. And so the Mexicans were saying, we're deporting you unless you apply for asylum. So a whole lot of these immigrants from all over the world were applying for asylum in Mexico. And I'm asking, why are you bothering with this? You certainly didn't come here for the great Mexican dream. Every one of them were telling me that, well, the Democrats are going to win. And so we're making these life decisions based on that. We think Trump's going to lose, the Democrats are going to win, and they're going to open the gates and let us in. And so thousands were applying for Mexican asylum just in anticipation of that day. And when Biden won the nomination, polls were double digits. There were all this news that Biden was going to win. He laid out his immigration agenda, which was essentially open borders, talking about we're going to end deportation, talking about we're going to end wait in Mexico, the policy. We're going to provide a path to citizenship to everybody here who's illegally present. That's, you say something like that and you have the Biden effect. And so that's when, during the campaign, you started to see a very significant, right around April of 2020, you started to see a severe spike. They were coming in, staging in northern Mexico, getting their asylum, Mexican asylum, getting ready to come over the day Biden took office. He won the election, and within a day, they were storming the border. They were storming the border. In some cases, there were hundreds that would just, force their way over an international bridge chanting Biden, Biden, Biden. Trump was still technically in office, so they stopped him with riot troops. But that's the Biden effect that, immigrants are smart people.
Right.
You should never underestimate that they're just some kind of like amorphous mass of people. They have cell phones and computers, and they're tied into the internet and the news and social media, and they have lifetime intelligence. So when the president of the United States says, I am ending ICE deportations, you have just invited everybody who heard that to come in right now. And that is why we're experiencing what we're experiencing at the moment, with this huge hundreds of percentage point increases month by month since inauguration day. And actually before that, since the election, It started on November 3rd. Now, in the time that I have been going to the border since the
Hmm.
election,
Hmm.
I interview immigrants down there all the time, all sorts from Middle East and from Central America. And they all tell me that they are coming now to take advantage of Biden's lenience and laxity on border enforcement, the end of deportation. People are being waved through.
Hmm.
They're doing catch and release. Specific policies, they ended wait in Mexico. That was a very incredibly effective, innovative policy by the Trump administration, where that got at the psychology. It was innovative in that it applied directly to immigrant decision making. Brilliant in that way, that immigrants come across the border and claim asylum,
Hmm.
knowing that they'll be able to wait for that asylum adjudication, the decision inside the United States, and that if they lose, too bad, they're staying. You have to come and get me, which never happens. And even so, their asylum claims usually don't even get heard for years because there's such a
Hmm.
backlog. So they're in. Wait in Mexico was you can apply for asylum, but you're not going to be in.
Hmm.
And the result of that was that they stayed home. Why bother? We don't want to stay in Mexico for months on end. We'll come when the Democrats get in, you know. So that's the first thing that went.
Hmm.
On
Hmm.
day one, they ended wait in Mexico and said, you are all going to get to come in now and wait inside for your asylum claims. And so there's just pouring through the breach,
Yeah.
thousands, tens of thousands.
And of course, you're not saying everybody coming across is a terrorist, but what you are saying is the needle in the haystack just became, with the Biden effect, two needles in a haystack or three needles in the haystack, which puts all of us in the United States at risk, to internal terrorist activity. By the way, I should point this out. We're recording this. I'm in Houston. I'm actually in Sugar Land, which is southwest Houston, which is very near the border, as everyone knows. And so that's why this is kind of an issue to folks out here.
Yeah, they do. Houston is a big destination for illegal immigrants. But if I can just elaborate a little bit more,
Please.
the what so what happened to Europe is when this mass migration happened, it collapsed their normal border management systems, detention processes, asylum processes, uh, vetting processes. The numbers were so vast that they couldn't do anything except just hand them papers and say we'll deal with you later. And as a result, the actual terrorists, jihadists, were able to just come in and have all this time to uh, plot and gather their materials. And they didn't just come in spraying machine gun fire or
Right.
exploding suicide vests. That's not how it happened. They come in and they rely on the collapse of the normal management systems. And so what we're having here in the United States at the moment is a collapse of our normal management systems.
Mm-hmm.
Border Patrol having to babysit children and unaccompanied minors and having to process all of this huge crush of families and having to build facilities, and the normal management systems are collapsing before our eyes. And when that happens, the risk that that
Yeah.
that, that these the needles in the haystack are able to come in and shoot
Mm-hmm.
up the Galleria in 3 or 4 months
Mm-hmm.
rises. And that's the connection to mass migration and the Biden effect.
Mm-hmm.
If you're an intelligence person, you're thinking that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk just for a couple of seconds, couple minutes, about preventive maintenance. Here's some terms that you discuss: near war versus far war. You also comment on the abuse of the asylum system. You've already commented a little bit about that. And then you talk about fake documentation that can be attained in Latin America. I guess if you are Middle Eastern, you can go through Latin America and get some fake documents that say your origin is Central America or South America. That was sort of an eye opener. And so in chapter 9 of your book, you're recommending policy changes or recommendations. So with that litany on the table, what can be done? And one of the things I like about your book is you don't just describe the problem. So many books are very good at describing the problem. It's what's the answer
Well,
or answers?
right. First, let me just explain the near war and the far war,
Yeah.
because the two. When the title is America's Covert Border War, well, what is that war? I divide it up into the near war and the far war. The near war I've described a little bit. When these guys show up at the border, a special interest alien, they're tagged special interest alien. There is this process that kicks in, especially if they're watch listed. We just had 2 Yemenis caught at the California border who are already on the FBI's terrorism watch list.
Yeah, they were on the no-fly list, right?
Yeah, and one of them was even on the no-fly list, which is a very rarefied, high threshold to get on that list. So you can trust that that guy is definitely a terrorist. You can call that guy a terrorist. You're not going to be on the no-fly list if you aren't considered dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But those that would offer a great way to explain the near war. So those guys get caught, stamped special interest alien. FBI runs to the detention center. They get flagged and they go to the detention center. Sometimes it might be ICE intelligence officers. Sometimes it might be the DIA. It could be the CIA. There are 3-letter agencies that will rush into the detention centers and conduct a face-to-face interrogation that could last for days, hours, days. They take cell phones. They there is a litany of things that are done to try to determine who they are. How bad are they? Are they deceptive? Are they terrorists? Why are they on the terrorist watch list? And then part of the near war is that if they are determined to be a threat to national security, we don't take them to trial. We don't do a conviction. We don't do any of that stuff. We deport them. And that's how we eliminate that threat. These deportations happen all year round. I've watched these happen each of the 9 years that I was in government service. That is why we haven't had a terror attack to date. Although one of these guys did manage to get through and go to Edmonton, Canada, and conducted a double vehicle ramming attack there carrying an ISIS flag. He came in over the California border and they missed him. Like it's easy to defeat the near war as well, which I describe all the ways that they do defeat. And the other thing is the problem with the near war is that we're not interviewing all of them. We don't have enough people to get to them. So a lot of them bond out on their asylum claims and they're in, and nobody ever got to really interview them. I saw that happen a lot in the Department of Public Safety, and I was so concerned about it that I started a program at the Department of Public Safety where my analysts were going down into the detention centers with me to get those interviews done, as many as we could, and get the intelligence reporting to the intelligence community where it could be of use. Um, that's the near war. The far war is really intriguing. That involves ICE Homeland Security investigations. They are in 40 or 50 countries down there hunting the smugglers, the special interest alien smugglers who create the bridge over the Atlantic, where provide the false documents and the visas and the bribery, the hotels and the staging from country to country until they get here. And so ICE concentrates its FAR war on busting up these smugglers and these smuggling organizations. The other thing they do is they have a tripwire system with allied governments, vetted units of intelligence and police in these allied countries. And they work together to, when they flag a jihadist coming through, they can catch him before he ever gets to the border and do the interrogation and the downloads and the investigation down there. And that happens probably more than it happens at the actual border. So there's a double net. They have to get through that net down there, and then they have to get through the border net. And the FAR war has all kinds of other problems. It's understaffed. ICE gets diverted to drug cases all the time. These programs are so disparate that they're never evaluated for what they need or how well they're doing, or if they're failing, or some kind of an overarching evaluation to just make sure that, especially in a mass migration crisis, they hold together and that they keep us safe. I attribute the lack of terror attacks to the men and women who are in the near war and the far war working together. Kept us safe for many years, in my opinion. Canada, not so much. They got an attack, one got through. I do expect that somebody will get through here at some point in this mass migration crisis. And man, I hope I'm wrong. But let me just fast forward to some recommendations about this. There are a number of Achilles heels here. One of them is that there's no evaluation. Jay Johnson, who was a Democratic appointee of Barack Obama in 2016, proposed. I mean, Democrats, I'm going to just tell you that Democratic administrations have been just as on this as Republicans.
Well, it shouldn't be a partisan issue. It's our safety.
It hasn't been. It hasn't been, and I don't think it will be under the Biden administration. I don't want to see, at least I saw them change the name of special interest aliens to something else, but I was glad to see them make that change because it showed that they still had a term for it. They're still doing this. That told me that they're still doing it. The near war and the far war. But Jay Johnson came up and he pulled all of the heads of the DHS component agencies that deal with border. There were 10 of them. Head of ICE, head of CBP, all of them, brought them all together in the same room and said, we have got to get everybody on the same page and evaluate what we're doing to stop jihadists from crossing the border. I have that document. I start out my chapter 2 with this document, Democratic administration, a Democratic appointee, a Democratic operative, but somebody who saw the intelligence, the real intelligence, and was worried about it. Trump came into office and that thing just went by the wayside in the dust up of transition. One of the primary guys who was on it was Kelly, who became the chief of staff for Trump for a while. And he was head of DHS for a while, and John Kelly, and he was continued it. But then when he got transitioned over to the White House, it just ended. So one of my top recommendations is to restore Jay Johnson's plan for SIA vetting and jihadist infiltration prevention over that border.
Well, could that be, because part of my question is, what can we, as a lot of people watching are just simple, non-political folks. I mean, they vote in elections, and you're talking about a lot of things happening at the governmental level, but what can we do as Mr. and Mrs. America? I mean, should we write to our representatives and ask them to restore that policy you're talking about? You have something really tangible for us.
Yes, that is a. I mean, really, for regular people who are not in government or not elected leaders, there is a blueprint in the book, Chapter 9. There are a lot more recommendations than just that one. There are a lot of problems that need to be fixed to shore this up and to make sure that it doesn't break down in a mass migration crisis like we're having right now.
Mm-hmm.
The way to do that is, in my opinion, is to get this information to your local senator and congressman through their constituent services. I know that sounds like, I mean, don't underestimate constituent services. It does work. They will hear that information. Tell them that they must read this book, and in particular, the chapter 9 with all of those recommendations, and to I mean, really, the asylum system is one of the biggest Achilles heels. I dedicate a whole chapter to how special interest aliens abuse that system so easily. They make up fake persecution stories. The system is set up to usher them in, not to detect fraud, asylum fraud. And there have been countless GAO reports pointing to this problem. This is the problem that enabled terrorists to get into Europe and kill and maim thousands. It's a very similar system. When it happens, it's going to be because of the asylum system, the way it's set up right now. I have a whole chapter devoted to all of the intricacies of that and what needs to happen with that. Another issue is almost all SIAs come to the border with no identification. They somehow lose their. It's the weirdest thing. I've never, like, even when I was in government service and my team was interviewing these people, somehow nobody ever had identification. So they come in and they say, "My name is Mickey Mouse and I declare asylum, prove otherwise." And the way that they were able to do that very often, not always, is that these Latin American countries like Mexico and Brazil and Guatemala and a number of other places have embassies and consulate offices in the Middle East that are corrupt. And so you can buy a passport, you can buy a Mexican passport and pretend you're a Mexican. And that has happened with Afghans and Pakistanis. And the Latin American embassy systems, the consulate systems abroad, are just sieves for the documents that are necessary to fly over that Atlantic and get close within striking distance of the US border, often through hostile countries like Cuba. That's a CIA matter. That is something that or maybe DIA too, that our intelligence services need to attack. Because I mean, really, that's often like, we're not going to, Venezuela is not going to accept ICE agents in Caracas. They're just hostile, and neither are the Cubans going to allow them in investigators into Havana or Damascus or anywhere else, Syria. So that's another big Achilles heel, needs to be fixed. And there are quite a few others. A big one is that I don't think that there are enough HSI agents that are attacking and hunting down these special interest alien smugglers. They need to look at the manpower for that and make sure it doesn't get. I've talked to HSI agents recently who said all of my cases are on ice now, meaning we're not doing them because we're getting involved. We're getting pulled into the mass migration crisis, having to pull duty over there. And congressmen and senators need to make sure that ICE HSI is staying on that ball during this for as long as it lasts.
Well, how about this for an Achilles heel? The fact that we have as Americans a very short term memory. In other words, when 9/11 happened, obviously this issue was foremost on our minds. And you indicated today something that I didn't know and haven't really thought about, and probably most Americans don't know about it either, is the fact that we've successfully stopped numerous terrorist attacks that people are completely unaware of. So there's no buildings burning frequently enough, and the issue just isn't foremost on our minds.
Well, I mean, it's an unfortunate thing about Americans, and maybe it's a human trait, characteristic that's not just about Americans, but that we tend to be reactive. We respond rather than preempt. It's like a human condition that until there's blood in the street, we're not going to invest. And that's terribly unfortunate circumstance. And I don't think I can change it. It's human nature. Unfortunately, the information about thwarted attacks and like the Yemenis that were caught in Calexico, California,
Mm-hmm.
government admitted that. They put a press release out detailing what happened. This isn't supposition on my part. The American public will never know what happened or what they were about. It's all covert. It's secret stuff. We're
Mm-hmm.
not, and the American media establishment is singularly uninterested in ever reporting or digging in about those Yemenis or any other Yemenis like them. They will never report it. The press release went out and didn't get reported. And
Wow.
and it goes on and on like that. Court cases of actual terrorists caught at the border and prosecuted in a public court setting with all of their Al Shabaab terrorist activities laid out in the public record don't get any coverage.
Mm-hmm.
It's all in my book, of course.
Right.
I have many, the entire book is interlaced where
Yeah.
it makes sense with anecdotes dating all the way back to 2003, after 9/11, of terrorists and jihadis that got caught in Latin America on their way here or at the border who were deported, and sight unseen, no public record of it. But that's happening all the time. The Mexican government in early 2020 released a document that admitted that they had apprehended and deported 19 Islamic terrorists on
Mm-hmm.
their way to the US border. And they named the countries: Somalia, Yemen, Bangladesh, Syria, and Iraq were among the nationalities of those 19
Mm-hmm.
over a span of about 3 or 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big number, but the Mexicans were out with that, and it got
Mm-hmm.
no reportage at all, nothing. So if the American public doesn't even know about this, that's
Mm-hmm.
happening. The Panamanians recently reported, it's in my book, 49 terrorist alerts coming through from South America, from Colombia through the Isthmus.
Mm-hmm.
They caught and deported a lot of those from all those same countries. So the system is working pretty well, but I really fear that it was already starting to crumble when Jay Johnson realized it in
Mm-hmm.
2016, and now it's been 4 years on, and we've got a crisis happening, and somebody needs to just make sure that they shore that thing up.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've actually gotten through, Todd, most of my questions, except this one. I threw this one in here. Are there any other pertinent issues that you'd like to address right now, that we didn't have a chance to cover in this interview format? Any holes that need to be filled in here?
Well, I mean, other than that, it matters. The words that are used by the president and his administration those words launch 1,000 ships every day. Every time that they say no child will be left behind in Mexico, you're going to have 10,000 more leave their homes to
Wow.
come here. Every time you say you can apply for asylum inside the United States and stay here forever, if you're a family, we're not going to turn you back. Expect 100,000 families to come. Of course they would.
Mm-hmm.
So the Biden administration, I think there's something missing where they don't understand that immigrants are actual smart people who have every incentive to get here because
Mm-hmm.
it's better here
Mm-hmm.
to get here outside of our system. And so I'm just watching the administration conjure up this incredible. We're going to have about 200,000 for the month of just April in a 4-week span.
Wow.
You had 177,000, maybe more than that if you include the gotaways last month. Since the beginning of the administration, we've got 500,000 immigrants presumed to have crossed in illegally into this country. Over the course of a year, it's going to be 1.5 million, maybe 2,
Mm-hmm.
3 years, 5 million, 3 years. I mean, a city the size of Los Angeles pouring in over the border just is
Wow.
stunning. I mean, that's something that is unique to American history. Nothing like that has ever happened in this country.
Yeah.
So,
I guess I've felt, and maybe I'm oversimplifying, and correct my oversimplification if you think it is one. I've felt that the Republicans, for the most part, have turned a blind eye to this issue for a long time because the Republican Party has a tendency to be more business oriented and they like the cheap labor. The Democrats, on the other hand, turn a blind eye to the issue because they see all these people coming across as potential voters. So until Trump came along, almost neither party, in my humble opinion, really showed a lot of concern for the issue. And if you don't show any concern for it, now we've got not just one needle in the haystack, 2, 3, 4, 5, and all of our public safety is at risk. Am I oversimplifying things there?
no, actually, you got that pretty well.
Okay.
You're right. I mean, both parties are responsible for this. They can't. They're self-interested. There are powerful elements in both parties that are self-interested, both in power accumulation and just cheap labor and what that means. Uh, and so we can't get together on a comprehensive reform or what to do about it.
Mm-hmm.
But and it's also complicated by the fact that if you are for restricting illegal immigration, you're a racist, you're a xenophobe, you are all of these terrible things. You get called these terrible names. And I think that has a chilling effect politically on people wanting to enact the right laws that
Mm-hmm.
are necessary to do this. So, I mean, no country on earth that I know of, and you probably know this better than me, going back to ancient times, to
Mm-hmm.
biblical times, has ever existed that wasn't interested in enforcing its borders,
Right.
external borders against foreign armies or unwanted peoples or people that for whatever reason countries have borders. It's just always
Yeah.
been that way. And horizontally, all nations of the current earth uh, you know enforce their borders. There's nobody that just blows off their borders
Right.
except one country, this one this
Well, that's why we did that. I mentioned at the very top of the show, the part one and part two, the biblical morality of border enforcement, because Obama, it's really interesting. The left started quoting the Bible. When Obama would give an immigration speech, he would start quoting passages out of the book of Exodus. And I didn't think the left cared about the Bible, and suddenly the Bible's being co-opted
Right.
to support porous borders as somehow that's the Christian thing to do. And that's why we did the 2 shows on, why it's biblically moral to enforce your borders. And you coming on today, just supplements what we were trying to say. But, Jesus said, you'll know the truth shall set you free. And the very first thing people need to understand is to sift through the rhetoric and get the truth. And I can't think of a better place to start than with your book. And so can you, as we conclude today, can you tell people how to get your book, where to get it, and what websites and things are you on so people can start tracking with you?
Well, thank you very much for asking that question.
Yeah.
So the book is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble and, any kind of bookseller online. You should also be able to find it at, in brick and mortar bookstores in the current affairs section. So, I mean, it's easier to, you can get a Kindle version or buy the hardback. My writings are typically, I put all of I don't just write about immigration. I also write about jihadist terrorism threats in general that have nothing to do with immigration. I write for a number of other publications like the Investigative Project on Terrorism, the Federalist, and some other places. So toddbensman.com is my personal website. I try to put all my my writings there, but also at Center for Immigration Studies, CIS.org.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not super great on social media. I've only had 2 years out of Intel to do that. Intel people don't have social media. So I do have a Twitter account now, Bensman Todd, and I have LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn.
Yeah. Well, this is good. We've gone almost an hour and a half, which makes me happy because I've watched, well, first of all, this is a complicated public policy issue. You can't deal with it in a soundbite. And as I've been trying to research you in preparation for today, I've watched you on interviews where you're only given, 2.5 minutes to make your case. And I feel like
I'm happy
here, you've at least had a chance to make your case. And if people want to know more, they can get to your book and learn even more. And so I'm hoping we can have you back at some point because this issue is not going away. And it's going to evolve from here. So I'm hoping at some point we can get you to come back if you'll agree to do that.
I'm happy to. First of all, thank you for letting me air all of this on in a long format. And also, I spend a lot of time at the border now. I just came back from Big Bend on Monday. I'm heading back down to the Rio Grande Valley. I live in Austin, so.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so if you ever want to get an update on what's happening for reals down there, follow me, toddbensman.com or have me on again. I'll tell you.
Yeah. And, we appreciate your, the scholarly nature, that by which you've gone about things. You're not, there's a lot of oratorical flamethrowers out there, and you're not an incendiary person at all. You're just trying to get to the truth and what's good for the United States. So thanks for that. And
that's the journalism background right there.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Beat that into your head.
That's good. So thanks again. I guess at this point we'll sign off. And thanks, Todd, for joining us today on Pastor's Point of View. God bless you.
Thank you.